In 2009, a black teenage girl vanished after texting her mom she was almost home from track practice. 10 years later, construction workers found her cell phone and backpack behind a false wall in the locker room at the school. The sound of the pry bar splintering old wood echoed in the otherwise quiet school hallway, a hollow pop that signaled more than just demolition. One of the workers, caked in dust, reached into the dark gap he'd created. He pulled out a faded pink backpack, then a small, surprisingly intact cell phone. He turned to his partner, a silent question in his eyes. They hadn't expected to find anything but old pipes and insulation. This felt different. This felt wrong. The school was mostly empty, summer renovations in full swing, but the silence suddenly seemed heavier, colder. The foreman was called, then the police. The items looked old, forgotten. But how could a backpack and phone end up inside a wall? A wall that, according to the faded blueprints they'd consulted earlier, shouldn't even have been there, not in that specific spot in the girls' locker room. The news reached her mother, Sarah, later that day. A knock on the door, two grim-faced officers, she knew before they spoke. 10 years. 10 years of holding her breath, of scanning crowds for a familiar face, of nights spent staring at the ceiling, replaying that last text message. Almost home. Now, this. A backpack. A phone. Found at the school. The school her daughter, Maya, had walked out of for track practice and never returned from. The initial wave of grief was so powerful, it buckled her knees. A fresh, sharp agony, as if it had happened only yesterday. But beneath it, a tiny, terrible flicker of something else. Hope? No, not hope. More like a desperate need for answers. A need that had gnawed at her for a decade. What was on that phone? What secrets did that backpack hold? The officers were gentle, their words carefully chosen. They explained where the items were found, behind a section of wall that seemed to have been added later, not part of the original structure. A false wall. Why would there be a false wall in a high school locker room? And why were Maya's things behind it? The questions swirled. Too many. Too fast. Sarah nodded, numb. She remembered the early days of the search. The police combing the school. The woods behind it. The neighborhood. How could they have missed this? Or was it not there to be missed? Back then, the thought was a cold sliver of dread. Had this wall been built after Maya disappeared? The implications were horrifying. The police carefully bagged the items. The backpack, caked with a decade of dust, and the faint, musty smell of decay, still bore a keychain Maya had loved, a tiny silver running shoe. The phone, an older model, its screen dark, was the real mystery. Could they get anything from it after all this time? Sarah looked at the lead detective, a woman with tired but kind eyes. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Will you be able to see what's on it?" The detective met her gaze. "We'll do everything we can." The wait began, an old, familiar ache settling back into Sarah's chest. But this time, it was different. This time, there was a tangible link to Maya's last moments, hidden away for 10 long years. What had happened in that locker room? And what, or who, had that wall been built to hide? The silence in her house was deafening, filled only with the echo of that single, unbearable question. What was on Maya's phone? The year 2009 replayed in Sarah's mind, a constant, looping film reel of Maya's last day. Maya, vibrant and full of life. Her laughter echoing in the kitchen that morning as she grabbed a banana, late for school as usual. She was a good kid, focused on her running, her grades decent enough. She dreamed of a track scholarship, of getting out, seeing the world. Sarah had encouraged it, proud of her daughter's drive. That afternoon, Maya had track practice. Standard routine. She'd texted Sarah around 5:30. Practice over. Almost home. Love you. Sarah had texted back. Love you too. See you soon. But soon never came. The hours ticked by. Dinner grew cold. 6 o'clock. 7. Sarah started calling Maya's phone. Straight to voicemail. Panic, a cold serpent, began to uncoil in her stomach. She called Maya's friends, the coach. Yes, practice ended on time. Yes, Maya left with everyone else, or so they thought. Some said she mentioned needing to grab something from her locker. By 9, Sarah was at the police station, her voice trembling as she filed a missing person report. The search began the next morning. The school was the first place they looked, of course. Classrooms, hallways, the gym, the locker rooms. Officers walked through, calling Maya's name. Dogs were brought in. They sniffed around her locker, then seemed to lose the trail. Had she even made it back inside after practice? Or did something happen on the way home, that short walk she'd made hundreds of times? The community rallied. Flyers with Maya's bright, smiling face were plastered on every lamppost, in every store window. Volunteers searched the woods, the local parks, every abandoned building they could find. The days turned into weeks. The police interviewed everyone: students, teachers, Maya's friends, their parents. Every lead turned into a dead end. Every whispered rumor was chased down, only to evaporate. There was talk of a quick renovation at the school, some urgent repair work in the girls' locker room area, not long after Maya vanished. Sarah remembered asking about it, a frantic edge to her voice. Could Maya be trapped? Could she have fallen? Been injured? The police assured her they'd checked. The construction was minor, they said. Some plumbing work, a bit of drywall repair, nothing to suggest a hidden space large enough to conceal a person or her belongings. The original detective assigned to the case, a man named Peterson, had seemed overwhelmed. He'd spoken to Sarah with a kind of weary sympathy that slowly eroded her hope. There were no signs of foul play, he'd said. Teenagers run away sometimes. But not Maya, Sarah had insisted. Not without her phone, her wallet, her favorite running shoes. Not without a word. The case grew cold. The flyers faded and tore in the rain. The news crews moved on to other stories. But for Sarah, it never grew cold. It was a living, breathing wound. Now, 10 years later, this. The backpack, the phone, found inside the school, inside a wall, that quick renovation. A cold dread washed over Sarah. Had they missed her? Had Maya been there, right there, all along? The thought was unbearable. The silence from the police about the phone's contents stretched, each day longer than the last. She tried to prepare herself for what they might find, or what they might not. The phone could be too damaged, its secrets lost forever, or it could hold the key. The police lab was a sterile, quiet place, a stark contrast to the chaotic emotions swirling around Maya's case. The phone, an old flip model, was carefully disassembled. Time, moisture, and confinement had taken their toll. The battery was corroded, the internal components delicate. Getting any data off it would be a small miracle. Detective Miller, the new lead on the reopened case, watched the technician work. She felt the weight of Sarah's unspoken plea. Miller hadn't been around for the original investigation, but she'd read the thick file, the dead ends, the fading hope. This was their first real break in a decade. While the tech team worked on the phone, another team meticulously examined the backpack. Its contents were heartbreakingly ordinary. A spiral notebook with algebra equations half solved. A dog-eared paperback novel, a bookmark partway through, a tube of lip gloss, a crumpled wrapper from a granola bar, a single silver stud earring, its partner likely lost long ago. These were the mundane artifacts of a teenage girl's life, now imbued with a tragic significance. Each item was a fresh stab of pain for Sarah when Miller later described them. She could picture Maya packing that bag, slinging it over her shoulder. It made her daughter feel so close, yet still impossibly far away. The days crawled by. Sarah called Detective Miller every morning, her voice tight with anxiety. "Anything?" "Not yet, Sarah. We're still trying." The process was painstaking. They had to bypass the damaged power systems, carefully extract the memory chip, and then use specialized software to try and reconstruct the data. Each step was fraught with the possibility of failure. Then, almost a week after the discovery, Miller's phone rang. It was the lab. "We got something," the tech said, his voice carefully neutral. "Not much, but something." Miller felt her own pulse quicken. "What is it?" "A few text fragments. And maybe, just maybe, a partial audio file." The fragments were corrupted, jumbled, but there was enough to suggest they were from the day Maya disappeared. Miller knew she had to see Sarah in person. This wasn't news to deliver over the phone. She drove to Sarah's house, the small evidence bag containing photocopies of what they'd found, and a digital recorder with the audio, feeling heavier than it should. Sarah opened the door, her eyes immediately searching Miller's. The detective didn't waste time. "We found something on the phone, Sarah." She led her to the kitchen table, the same table where Maya used to do her homework. The air was thick with unspoken grief. The waiting was over. But what would the truth bring? Relief? Or a pain even deeper than the not knowing? Detective Miller laid out the printouts on Sarah's kitchen table. The text fragments were short, some just single words, pieced together by the lab from the damaged data. Sarah leaned forward, her hands trembling as she read. One text, clearly unsent, time-stamped just minutes after Maya's last message to her, the one that said "almost home." This unsent one read, "Locker, RM. Scared." Another, a few minutes later, also unsent, "He's here. Can't leave." Sarah's breath hitched. He? Who was he? And she was in the locker room, scared. Why? What was happening? The "almost home" text suddenly felt like a lie. A desperate attempt to reassure her mother while she was already in trouble, or maybe a message she started and couldn't finish correctly in her fear. Or perhaps she truly believed she could still get out. Then Miller played the audio file. It was short, less than 30 seconds, filled with static and muffled sounds. But through the noise, Sarah heard it. Maya's voice, tight with fear. "No, please." Then a rustling sound, a thump. Another voice, male, low and indistinct. Then Maya again, a sharper cry, cut off abruptly. The recording ended, silence. Sarah stared at the digital recorder, her face pale. That was it. Maya's last sounds. Fear, a struggle, then nothing. She was in the school, trapped, with someone. The realization hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow. For 10 years, she'd imagined Maya being taken on the street, pulled into a car, a random, senseless act of violence. But this was different. This happened inside the school, a place Maya should have been safe, the place Sarah had sent her to every day. Who was he? And why was Maya scared of him in the locker room? The words "can't leave" echoed in Sarah's mind. She hadn't been able to leave. The false wall, the backpack and phone hidden. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a runaway. Maya had been cornered. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The almost home text now seemed like a desperate beacon, a message sent when she already knew she was in danger, perhaps hoping her mother would realize something was wrong when she didn't arrive. Or maybe she was trying to text someone else, her friend, 911, and in her panic, hit her mother's contact. The detective watched Sarah, her expression full of a quiet sorrow. These new clues painted a terrifying picture. Maya hadn't just vanished on her way home. She'd vanished from within the school itself, and her phone held the chilling evidence of her final frightened moments. The brief audio, the unsent texts, they were like ghosts, whispering a story that had been silenced for a decade. The horror of it was a fresh wave of grief, sharper, more defined than the dull ache of the unknown. Her daughter had been terrified. Her daughter had fought, and someone had silenced her. The investigation now had a new, terrifying focus: the school itself, specifically the girls' locker room, and that inexplicable false wall. Detective Miller and her team revisited the site. The construction crew had paused their demolition in that area, the jagged opening in the wall a grim reminder of what they'd found. Looking at it now, with the knowledge from Maya's phone, the wall seemed sinister, deliberately placed. Miller got the school's original blueprints and the records for the renovation that happened in late 2009, just weeks after Maya disappeared. The timing was more than suspicious. It felt complicit. Why the rush? The official records were vague: urgent plumbing repairs and associated structural reinforcements in girls' locker facility. But the false wall itself wasn't explicitly detailed in the main work order. It was almost an afterthought, a hastily scrawled addendum for additional partition storage area. Who authorized this specific addition? The signature on that addendum was difficult to read, belonging to a facilities manager who had retired years ago and moved out of state. The construction company that did the work was a local firm. Miller tracked down the owner, now semi-retired. He vaguely remembered the job. A quick contract, he'd said. The school wanted it done fast, during a short break or over a couple of weekends, to minimize disruption. He didn't recall anything unusual, but it was a long time ago. Did he remember who on his crew built that specific wall? He couldn't say for sure. They had several small teams. He promised to look through his old paper records, if he could even find them after all this time. The plans for the locker room showed an alcove, perhaps for old equipment or cleaning supplies. It was this alcove that had been walled off. Why? It didn't make sense from a design perspective. It created dead space, unless the purpose wasn't storage, but concealment. The thought sent a chill down Miller's spine. Someone knew Maya's belongings were there. Someone had directed them to be sealed away. Was it a panic move? A calculated effort to hide evidence? The workers who built it, were they unwitting accomplices, just following orders? Or did someone on that crew know more? The more Miller learned about the renovation, the more convinced she became that the false wall was key. It was too coincidental, too perfectly placed to hide what it had hidden. It was a tomb for Maya's last known possessions, and perhaps a clue to her fate. The structure itself felt like a silent testament to a terrible secret. Now, the question was, who knew that secret? Who had the authority, the access, and the motive to build a wall to hide the truth of what happened to Maya? The focus began to narrow. They needed to speak to everyone who worked at the school back then, especially anyone with access to the locker rooms, anyone involved in overseeing or carrying out that hurried renovation. The police began the painstaking process of re-interviewing staff who had worked at Northwood High in 2009. Teachers, administrators, coaches, custodians. Memories were faded, distorted by time. Many had retired or moved on, but the discovery of Maya's phone and backpack, the chilling new evidence, brought a fresh urgency. Detective Miller specifically asked about the locker room renovation and if anyone remembered anything unusual around the time Maya disappeared. That's when his name first came up, almost as an afterthought. Mr. Henderson, the janitor. One of the older teachers, Mrs. Gable, who still worked at the school, paused when Miller asked about custodial staff. She remembered Henderson. Quiet man, she said, kept to himself mostly. But then she added, there were whispers. What kind of whispers? Miller pressed. Mrs. Gable looked uncomfortable. Oh, just talk. Some of the girls felt he stared a bit too much. Hung around the girls' locker room area more than seemed necessary. Nothing concrete, just a feeling. He was let go, wasn't he? She asked. Around that time, I think. Shortly after the girl, Maya, went missing. Was it because of her? Or just budget cuts, maybe? Miller made a note. Henderson. Fired. Around the time Maya disappeared and the wall was built. The coincidence was glaring. School records confirmed it. Arthur Henderson, employed as a janitor, employment terminated 3 weeks after Maya's disappearance. Reason listed: restructuring and unsatisfactory performance. Unsatisfactory performance? Or was that a convenient excuse? Had there been complaints? The principal from that era was long gone, and personnel files were often sanitized. Miller cross-referenced Henderson's termination with the renovation timeline. He was fired the week the false wall was completed. Too many things were aligning around this one man. Had Henderson been interviewed back in 2009? Miller checked the original case file. Yes, a brief mention. Arthur Henderson, janitor. Stated he saw Maya leave with other students after track practice. Said he was cleaning the boys' locker room that evening. No follow-up. He wasn't considered a suspect. The rumors about him being creepy were noted but dismissed as teenage gossip without any formal complaints to back them up. Now, those rumors felt different. Now, they felt like missed signals. Where was Arthur Henderson now? 10 years was a long time. People move, change names, disappear themselves. Finding him would be the next critical step. The investigation, which had been a cold case for so long, suddenly had a very real, very tangible person of interest. He was there. He had access. He was fired right after. The air in the incident room crackled with a new tension. We need to find this janitor, Miller said to her team. Find out why he was really fired. And find out what he knew about Maya Banks and that goddamn wall. The hunt for Arthur Henderson began. Tracking down Arthur Henderson after a decade proved challenging. He hadn't stayed in the area. He'd moved several times, bouncing between low-wage jobs in different states. Detective Miller's team ran his name through every database they had. Finally, a hit. A recent traffic ticket in a small town 3 states away. An address. It was a start. While one team focused on locating Henderson, another dug deeper into the renovation records. The original construction company owner, after days of searching his dusty archives, found a faded work log. It listed the names of the 2-man crew assigned to the locker room partition. Neither name was Arthur Henderson. But it did note that a school custodian was on site to provide access and clear surplus materials. Which custodian? The log didn't specify. Sarah, Maya's mother, was kept informed of these developments. The name Henderson meant nothing to her at first. Just another faceless employee at a large school. But then, a vague memory surfaced. A man, often lingering in the hallways after school hours when she'd picked Maya up late from an event. She'd never thought much of it. Janitors worked odd hours. But now, in this new, terrifying context, the memory felt unsettling. She remembered Maya once mentioning a creepy janitor, but had dismissed it as typical teenage exaggeration. The guilt of that dismissal was a fresh stab of pain. Detective Miller also reached out to Detective Peterson, the original lead investigator, now retired. Peterson was defensive at first. We did everything we could with what we had, he insisted. The school was searched. Henderson was interviewed. He had an alibi. Said he was working in a different part of the school. There was no evidence to hold him, no reason to suspect him further at the time. The rumors about him were just that, rumors. No one ever filed a formal complaint. Miller listened, understanding the pressures of an old, cold case, but the missed opportunities were galling. The false wall, built so soon after. Henderson fired so soon after. Why hadn't those connections been made more forcefully then? The focus had been on Maya running away, or an abduction outside the school, not something happening inside. The team assigned to find Henderson finally got a visual confirmation. He was living in a run-down apartment complex, working a night shift cleaning job at a local factory. He was older now, grayer, but recognizable from his old staff photo. Miller and another detective made the trip. The drive was long, filled with a grim anticipation. What would Henderson say? Would he stonewall them? Confess? The weight of 10 years of unanswered questions, of Sarah's enduring grief, pressed down on Miller. This felt like it could be the moment. The moment the truth, however ugly, finally began to surface. They found Henderson's apartment, a bleak, anonymous door, in a long, dim hallway. Miller knocked. The seconds stretched. This was it. The door creaked open, revealing Arthur Henderson. He was thinner than in his old ID photo, his face etched with lines, his eyes wary. He looked like a man who expected bad news. Detective Miller identified herself and her partner, showed her badge. "We need to talk to you about Maya Banks," she said, her voice even. Henderson's eyes flickered, a momentary widening quickly controlled. Maya Banks? That was a long time ago. He didn't invite them in. "Can we come inside, Mr. Henderson? Or would you prefer to talk down at the local precinct?" He hesitated, then stepped back, allowing them into a small, sparsely furnished living room. It smelled of stale cigarettes and fried food. Miller began, laying out the new evidence. The backpack, the phone, found behind the false wall in the girls' locker room, the unsent texts, the audio recording. She watched Henderson's face for any reaction. He remained largely impassive, his gaze fixed on a spot on the far wall. When she mentioned the wall, he finally spoke. "I don't know anything about a wall. I was a janitor. I cleaned. That's it." "What about being fired, Mr. Henderson?" Miller pressed. "The school said it was unsatisfactory performance. Was that the real reason?" He shrugged, a jerky movement. "They were cutting costs. Always are. My performance was fine." Detective Miller leaned forward slightly. "Maya went missing on a Tuesday. The renovation, the wall, it was built in the weeks following. You were fired the week it was completed. That's a lot of coincidence, don't you think?" Henderson's jaw tightened. "I already told the police back then. I was cleaning the boys' side that night. I saw her leave with other students. That was his story 10 years ago, and he was sticking to it. But Miller had the phone data. Maya's text said she was in the locker room, scared that he was there. Could he have been Henderson?" "Did you ever see Maya Banks in the girls' locker room after track practice that day, Mr. Henderson?" "No," he said, too quickly. His eyes, however, shifted away for a split second. Miller knew it was a lie. The interview continued for over an hour. Henderson denied any involvement, denied knowing how Maya's things got behind the wall, denied being the he in her texts. He stuck to his original alibi, vague as it was. He claimed he didn't even know about that specific renovation job in the girls' locker room, said he wasn't involved with any construction. But the work log said a custodian was on site. The detectives left Henderson's apartment with a sense of deep frustration. They knew he was lying. The micro-expressions, the inconsistencies, the sheer improbability of his ignorance, it all pointed to him. But they didn't have enough to arrest him. Not yet. His denial was firm. The evidence from the phone, while damning, didn't explicitly name him. It was still circumstantial. As they drove away, Miller's partner said, "He knows more than he's saying. Much more." Miller nodded grimly. "We just need to find the crack. He made a mistake somewhere. We need to find it." The confrontation hadn't yielded a confession, but it had solidified Henderson as their prime suspect. The next step was to break his alibi, to find someone or something that placed him in that locker room with Maya. Detective Miller knew Henderson's denials were a wall of their own, one they needed to breach. They started by re-examining his employment records, not just from Northwood High, but from previous and subsequent jobs. Was there a pattern? Any other complaints, no matter how minor? They found a brief note in his Northwood file about him being redirected from duties near the girls' gym on one occasion a few months before Maya disappeared. After a female PE teacher mentioned, he seemed to linger unnecessarily. It wasn't a formal complaint, just an internal memo. Too little, too late. The key had to be someone who remembered Henderson's actions during those specific days after Maya vanished. Someone who saw him near that locker room, or involved with the construction of that wall. Miller's team painstakingly recontacted everyone from the old staff lists, this time with very specific questions about Henderson and the renovation. One name that came up was another janitor, a man named George Tanaka, who had worked the day shift while Henderson often worked evenings. Tanaka was retired now, living in a neighboring state. A detective flew out to speak with him. Tanaka remembered Henderson. Didn't like him much, he said. Henderson was too quiet, shifty. When asked about the renovation in the girls' locker room, Tanaka's memory sharpened. Yeah, I remember that. Rush job. They had Henderson helping out, even though it wasn't his usual area for that kind of work. Said they needed someone from maintenance to oversee access and help clear debris. I saw him coming out of there a couple of times with tools, drywall dust on his clothes. Tools? What kind of tools? Drywall saw, taping knives, stuff for putting up a wall. Tanaka's statement was crucial. It directly contradicted Henderson's claim that he knew nothing about the construction and hadn't been involved. It placed him at the scene, with the means. Miller felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the crack. They brought Henderson back in for questioning, this time at the local precinct in his town. Miller laid out Tanaka's statement. We have a witness, Mr. Henderson, who says you were involved in building that wall, who saw you with tools. Henderson's composure finally started to fray. His face paled. Tanaka? He's mistaken. Or lying. It was a long time ago. But his voice lacked conviction. Miller pressed on, showing him photos of Maya, of the backpack, the phone. She played the audio recording again, Maya's frightened voice filling the small interrogation room. This girl was terrified, Mr. Henderson. She was in that locker room, and she typed, "He's here. Were you that he?" His eyes darted around the room. He licked his lips. The pressure was immense. His carefully constructed wall of denial was crumbling. He started to mumble. It wasn't supposed to happen. An accident. She surprised me. I was just in there, checking something. He claimed Maya had come in, startled him, that she'd slipped, hit her head. He said he panicked. He didn't know what to do. The wall, it was already being planned for storage, he claimed. He just put her things behind it. And Maya? Miller asked, her voice cold. If it was an accident, where is she? Henderson finally broke. Tears welled in his eyes, a grotesque parody of grief. He buried his face in his hands. His confession, when it came, was a torrent of self-pity and excuses. But the core truth was horrifying. He admitted he'd been in the locker room when he shouldn't have been, that Maya had found him there. There was an altercation. He admitted he'd silenced her. And then, he told them where he had taken Maya's body, a remote, wooded area, owned by the school district, miles away, rarely visited, the place he used to dump old, broken equipment. The information Henderson provided led search teams, including Detective Miller and a forensic unit, to a desolate patch of overgrown woods. It was an area the school had once used as an unofficial dumping ground for old furniture and equipment, long since forgotten. After hours of grim searching, guided by Henderson's tearful, fragmented directions, they found it, a shallow grave, concealed by years of fallen leaves and debris. Maya's remains were there. The discovery was a somber, heartbreaking confirmation. For Sarah, the news was a devastating blow, yet also, in a strange, terrible way, a release. The not knowing, the endless imagining, had been a unique form of torture. Now there was a certainty, an end to that specific torment, replaced by the stark, cold reality of her daughter's murder. The grief was immense, but it was a grief she could finally begin to process, no longer held in suspension by a thread of impossible hope. The backpack and phone were eventually returned to Sarah. The items, once symbols of mystery and dread, now felt like the last tangible pieces of Maya she would ever hold. She looked at the unsent texts one last time, her daughter's fear palpable even in those few digital words. She listened to the brief, terrifying audio, Maya's last sounds, a final, heartbreaking connection. The community reacted with shock and outrage. How could this have happened within the walls of their school? How could a predator have hidden in plain sight? There was anger at the missed signals, the rumors dismissed, the investigation that had failed to uncover the truth a decade earlier. Arthur Henderson was charged with murder. His trial brought forth all the painful details, his confession, the evidence from the phone, Tanaka's testimony. He was found guilty, sentenced to life in prison, justice of a sort. But it wouldn't bring Maya back. For Sarah, life would never be the same. The vibrant, laughing girl who dreamed of track scholarships was gone forever, silenced in a moment of terror. The locker room wall, once a symbol of a hidden secret, was now a scar on the school's history. The space where Maya's belongings were found remained empty, a silent memorial. Sarah eventually started a small foundation in Maya's name, supporting young female athletes from underprivileged backgrounds. It was a way to keep Maya's spirit, her dreams, alive. The pain of her loss would never truly fade, but in place of the gnawing uncertainty, there was now a quiet, profound sorrow, and the enduring memory of the daughter who had texted she was almost home, and, in a way, finally had been, though not in the way anyone could have ever wanted. Have you ever heard of anything like this? Share your thoughts or stories in the comments.